The ink has been dry, and it's now hitting the shelves. The book has been written and completed on the 2024-2025 Big Ten season. Now it's time to sit back and take a look at 5 big stories that were also big takeaways for me during this Big Ten football season as we spin around this big nation.
From Pasadena to Piscataway, College Park to the Coliseum, Seattle to State College, Columbus to Camp Randall, the Zoo to the Rock, and everywhere in between. This is where Big Ten fans gather to talk America's premier national conference with your host, Big Ten Ted. All Big Ten, all year long. This is Big Nation.
And just like that, the season is over. Big Nation was really a thought and a byproduct of the offseason, and now here we are on Big Nation after this season is over, talking about the upcoming season. So we've kind of gone through the full cycle in the first year and first edition of a Big Nation in this program. Thanks to all of you for tuning in throughout the season. It has been a fantastic season. You know, it has been the longest season in college football history, but at the same time, it's also been the shortest season in college football history. And, you know, just like any season, there are chapters that are written from week to week throughout the book of a season. There are highs and lows. It's a roller coaster ride as you go through it from week to week. You think this team is good during this month, and all of a sudden they fall flat on their face the next month, or this team starts slow and maybe they have the first 3 games or 4 games that don't look great, and all of a sudden they turn it on towards the end of the year. And now it's time to sit back and look at 5 stories that I took as big takeaways from this Big Ten football season. I'm not saying these are the 5 biggest. I'm just saying that these are 5 that stand out to me. Let's start in the heart of it. Let's start in the heart of Big Ten country, right in the middle of America, that being Lincoln, Nebraska. You know, we talk about this book that's on the shelves and the book that's written, and now we're taking a look at some of the stories from the book of the Big Ten football season. You know, as this thing is being written from week to week, we're kind of adjusting, specifically when it comes to Nebraska, and my opinions on what it came to Nebraska as the season really went along. And now that we're not in the heat of it, now that we're kind of sitting back after this whole thing is done, you kind of look around and say, yeah, I guess that does make sense that the way things went for Nebraska this season, a 6-6 season, and then, of course, the bowl win over Boston College going 7-6, when there were expectations from people like myself and others for them to maybe win 8 games this year, maybe to win 9 games this year. I predicted them to go 8-4 during August this season. I felt pretty confident in that. But then when you look around, you see some of the ups and downs that this team faced with Matt Rule this season. Okay, first of all, you got a true freshman quarterback starting. Look, I don't care how good of a player that they were in high school or how highly they were rated. You bring in a kid in that situation, there's going to be some ups and there's going to be some downs, especially when you have injuries on the offensive line. And your offensive line isn't necessarily great, which was kind of the case for the Nebraska Cornhuskers this season. So you take that. That's just, basic knowledge. You're a true freshman. I say quarterback, but a true freshman really at any position, you plug him into the lineup, there's going to be some growing pains. And we saw some growing pains with Dylan Raiola this season. But you take that and then you combine it with, he was working with an offensive coordinator that was not a very competent play caller and offensive coordinator in Marcus Satterfield. And you go through kind of an unprecedented change based on the way it happened with Dana Holgerson late in the season, and you kind of have those trials and tribulations that you had combined with it being Dylan Raiola's true freshman season over there at Nebraska. And then you take that and you put on top of it that when you look at the skill positions, they had good players. I don't know if they necessarily had great players that could really help Dylan Raiola out a lot. We'll talk about the run game specifically here in just a minute, and the run game really didn't help Dylan Raiola out a lot, certainly, this season. So there was a little bit of some uphill climbs that could result, and that's exactly what happened, that did result in some inconsistencies. And then when we talk about inconsistencies for Nebraska, you got to talk about their defense as well. Like, you look at two specific games that stood out to me. I thought the Colorado game was fantastic, specifically in that first half, and obviously the way they finished it as well. The Ohio State game, that was another great defensive performance by this Nebraska team. But then you look at Indiana, where they were just absolutely lost out there defensively. It is crazy to me that the same defensive unit with the same defensive coordinator played defense in the Indiana game as they did in the Colorado and the Ohio State games. The Illinois game was one that was kind of the first sign where maybe this, because that was, I can't remember if it was a week or 2 weeks after that Colorado game, but it was still early in the season. That was a game where maybe some dents in the armor started to reveal themselves for this Nebraska defense. For those of you on podcast, I'll kind of say it out for you. For those of you on video, you can certainly see it over there. Nebraska was 7th in the Big Ten in total defense, and they were 11th against the pass. Now, when you look at that 7th ranking specifically in total defense, it makes a lot of sense. That's, with 18 teams, that's about an above average defense. I thought, and then you look at 11th in passing defense, they were much better against the run, really, than anything else. And this was a defense that just didn't have that consistency, that wasn't consistently good all throughout the season. And I think Dylan Raiola and Nebraska was banking on leaning on a really good black shirts defense. And that wasn't consistently good throughout the season. That wasn't something that Nebraska could consistently lean on to be able to help Dylan in some of these games. And then the run game, certainly as well. This was a team that was 11th in the Big Ten in running the football. So when you're a Matt Rule team and you preach toughness and you preach physicality and you got this great quarterback that you want to take advantage of, but as a freshman, he can't consistently lean on the run game, and he can't consistently lean on the defense, what do you get? You get an inconsistent football team. You get a team that starts off 5-1 and then loses 5 out of their last 6 games. So going forward to 2025, Nebraska has to work out. How can this team be more consistent? How can we help Dylan Raiola by having plus players on the perimeter? I think they went out to the portal and certainly got some good players. We'll see if that's able to translate. How can we be better on defense to put less pressure maybe on Dylan Raiola to make plays down the field as well? But that's kind of one story that was told in 2024, and we'll see how it translates over to 2025. Let's head over to the West Coast. Boy, I tell you what, I think a story that was told this season, Oregon is that team out west. And that's just not a saying that was put out with a documentary series in fall camp by the Oregon media team. If you really kind of take that and you branch it out and you break it down, I think this, and maybe this has been something that's been developing for some years, but I think this season specifically proved that Oregon is the superpower, certainly out there on the West Coast. And Oregon was the team out of the 4 West Coast editions that was obviously most ready to come into the Big Ten and be competitive in the Big Ten and play a Big Ten style and even take it to another level. Look, when you go 12-0 in the regular season and you win the Big Ten championship, yeah, I think that's a pretty good indicator that you were ready to play for the Big Ten Conference. And then, I could sit here and talk about Oregon and talk about Oregon and talk about Oregon, but maybe this is more about USC and UCLA and Washington. They combined for an 18-20 record this season. Of course, USC went 6-6 in the regular season. Washington went 6-6 in the regular season, and UCLA went 5-7 in their regular season as well. When we talk about these 3 other West Coast teams, I want to start first with the USC Trojans, because you watched them during the month of September, and that looked like a really good football team. I was all in on the Trojans bandwagon at that moment in time. Right, you look at that win against LSU on a neutral field. Yes, they lost 3 points against Michigan, but the way they kind of responded and the way they were looking, the way Miller Moss was looking, and the way the defense was looking improved. And, of course, the run game, Woody Marks was a 1,000-yard rusher certainly this season. But you look at USC, and they still got a long way to go. This is a Trojans program that still needs to be able to grow and still needs to be able to develop and still needs to be able to get better, right? Because you have Oregon demolishing some of these teams, whereas you have USC losing to Minnesota. You have USC losing to Maryland, a little bit of an up and down season. And then, like, it all starts when you look at the Big Ten, and was the success of the Oregon Ducks this season. They were really good in the trenches. Were they great? Were they elite? That's a totally different conversation that we can have maybe at another date as it pertains to maybe some of the Michigans and the Ohio States and the Penn States certainly up front. But I digress. When I talk about USC, did they allow the most sack numbers in the world? No, but Miller Moss indeed took a lot of hits this season, and that certainly didn't help things out. Miller Moss kind of degressed as the season went. They went to Jade Mayava, and of course we all know what happened towards the end of the season and how this season really ended up for the Trojans. I thought that their defense made strides forward, but once again, they still got a long way to go. When we talk about the standard, right now the standard is the Oregon Ducks. That's what we're measuring things up to. And USC, Washington, and UCLA seem like they're pretty far, and this gap is going to continue to grow. I don't really blame the Washington Huskies as much. You lost everything. You lost your great quarterback. You lost your great receivers. You lost some really good personnel on defense. You lose your head coach. You lose a great offensive coordinator. Like, you lost everything. This was going to be a year where you were going to be a little bit down and you were going to build yourself back up. Big for Washington to be able to get to a bowl game, get those extra bowl practices for the young guys on that team, for someone like a Damon Williams also on that team, to be able to get that experience for next season. I think Washington's going to keep on building. I'm not sure if next year that this is a team that's going to absolutely break through. Maybe it's still going to be a couple of years from now. So them being where they are, and it's not really against the norm for the Washington Huskies. You look at that 2016 team, you look at the 2023 team, last year with Michael Penix Jr. This is a program that has peaks, but then you kind of come down a little bit and then you peak back up. This is a team that maybe doesn't have the consistency towards the top, being able to win 9 or 10 games every single year for like a 6, 7, or 8 year period as well in there. And that's totally fine. We'll see if Washington can build their way back into that one. And then there's UCLA. This was very much a year zero for Deshaun Foster. And this team showed a lot of fight in a lot of these games as this season went along. The way this thing started, this is a team that maybe could have faded away and could have drifted off and maybe could have quit on somebody like Deshaun Foster. But they kept on fighting. They were in the conversation for bowl eligibility towards the end of the season. And that's big props to Deshaun Foster to be able to accomplish that. I think the gap is going to continue to grow because Dan Lanning is going to be able to continue to grow. I've talked about this before. He's not learning at Toledo. He's not learning at Wyoming. This is Dan Lanning's first head coaching job. He's going to learn to be more prepared with a 3-week hiatus between the Big Ten Championship and the Rose Bowl game. He's going to continue to learn. He's learning at an elite level right now. He's learning while going 13-0 and winning a Big Ten championship. And I know a lot of people might scoff at this at rival fan bases, but Oregon continues to recruit on an elite level. And this 2026 class is the number 1 ranked class in the country right now. They got some big-time recruits coming in for their junior day this weekend. So if that talent gap in recruiting continues to grow, the gap between Oregon and the other teams on the West Coast is always going to is going to continue to grow as well, because these high school recruits that you bring in, these high-level 5 stars and 4 stars, these are the guys that have the high ceilings. It's not the transfers. You don't bring in a transfer normally. I know there are certainly some exceptions, but normally you don't bring in a transfer to be a generational type of player. You bring in a transfer to be able to plug your holes in some starting gaps. And that's where we've gotten now that we're a couple of years into this and some of these recruits are maturing for Dan Lanning's Oregon Ducks. We are getting into a situation where now we're starting to see some of those guys grow, and now Oregon is being much more selective when it comes to the transfer portal. They took a lot of players in Dan Lanning's first year. They're taking much less players now to be able to fill those gaps. Coming into the season, I talked with Max Torres on this very program. Is this going to be the best Oregon team of all time? I talked to a lot of Oregon people offline, and a lot of people said, yeah, it's sure looking that way. But this is a program that continues to reload and reload year after year after year. When you have a high like Oregon did this year, you're not going to come crashing down. That's what Dan Lanning has established at the top, and that's why they are that team out west, why they are the West Coast best program, and not only on the West Coast in the Big Ten, but one of the Big Ten's best overall programs as well. Let's move and talk about Indiana and a story that really they may be set up for the rest of the Big Ten and maybe some other teams and other conferences, certainly in college football. With the right formula, there's going to be more Indianas. Here's the crazy thing about all of this, and this is why I love this current era of college football. Indiana is a team that you put into the same breath with the Northwesterns of the world, where you just expect them to maybe be in the basement of the Big Ten year after year after year. Heck, this is a men's basketball school, right? It's Assembly Hall. It's the striped warm-up pants, right? That's what it is. That's Indiana. And then for Curt Cignetti to go in there in 1 year and get this administration to buy into football and have the success that they did on the football field, that shows to everybody else in the Big Ten. Hell, it might even show to everybody else in college football. Anybody can do it. There is opportunity out there for anybody to flip this thing around and get into the college football playoff. Somebody's maybe going to do it next year. Who is it going to be? I don't know. That's the beauty of all of this. But with the right formula, there's going to be more of this. But I say with the right formula, there's a lot of things that all lined up in a row this season for the Indiana Hoosiers. There was an investment from the administration. Folks in Bloomington in suits putting money into football. And then you got to hire the right coach, whether it's going out and hiring him or whether it's you already have him in-house. Those are the first two things that you really got to have in order. And then you got to hit on a lot of talent acquisition, whether it's portal guys or whether it's high school guys. You kind of see all these things that certainly lined up for the Indiana Hoosiers. They hit on the transfer quarterback in Curtis Rourke. They brought a lot of these JMU kids over now. I think they knew whether that those kids were going to be able to transfer over from the group of five to the Big Ten. They were right on a lot of those kids this season. And then Curt Cignetti admitted this during interviews. You got to get the schedule draw. I know that was a hot topic of conversation during this season when talking about Indiana and their road to the college football playoff. But you line all of those things up. Check box after check box after check box after check box. You can do it. If you're Barry Odom at Purdue, you're saying, why not us? Let's get the investment. Let's get the right players in the right thing, and let's turn this baby around. You're looking at some of these other programs in the Big Ten, like you're looking at what Northwestern is doing and some of the players that they're bringing into the transfer portal, and now they're starting to get a little bit more oomph financially and bring in some better transfers than they were certainly before. There are teams out there that look at Indiana and their success this season and says, that's going to be us next year. The blueprint has been made public most certainly right now, and it's all about production over potential. I don't know if there's going to be a team that had 4 wins or 5 wins, 3 wins, whatever this year. Are they going to jump up to 11 wins and make the playoff next year? I'm not certainly predicting that in January, but I think a lot of teams are looking what Curt Cignetti did at Indiana, specifically taking transfers that played at lower levels of college football, but put up a lot of production rather than being a 5-star at Georgia and sitting on the bench. I think people are really going to look into that side of the blueprint and really see how that's going to translate to their team, certainly going forward. Let's move on and talk about the story that was just accomplished earlier this week, the national championship story. Of course, the Ohio State Buckeyes taking home the 2nd straight championship for the Big Ten Conference. You know, we were just talking about the blueprint for a team to maybe go from like 3 wins, 4 wins, 5 wins up to a double-digit win level. This is another sort of blueprint. And it's a blueprint for winning a national championship in today's day and age. Get good, get old, and win titles. I know the Ohio State faithful out there might not like this, but There's a lot from this blueprint on this Ohio State team that's very similar to the blueprint of that 2023 Michigan team. You have veteran guys coming back with a clear purpose in mind. Guys that could have gone on to the National Football League, coming back all together with a sole purpose within the locker room, and that's to win the national championship. Michigan falling 2 consecutive years in the semifinals. Ohio State losing all of those consecutive years to Michigan, and this class having one last opportunity to run it back for a national championship. And I think it's not just experience. It's experience from guys that have been in the facility on this team for years upon years, for 2 years, for 3 years. That's tough to do. When there's as much player movement as there is right now, it's hard to keep really good players for 2 years, for 3 years, certainly sometimes, especially if maybe they don't see the field in year 1, or if they see only a little bit of the field in year 2. A lot of times guys want to transfer. So to be able to build that group year after year after year and establish that group within the locker room, that's huge. Joel Klatt has done a really good job at talking about that on his podcast, and it kind of really made me think about this point that I'm certainly making right now. Is there a team? We saw it 2 years ago with Michigan. We saw it this last year with Ohio State. Watch out for Penn State. Watch out for Penn State. The Big Ten East really starting to flex their muscles, certainly, by winning some of these championships. Drew Aller's coming back. Katron Allen's coming back. Nick Singleton's coming back. Denai Dennis Sutton's coming back. Ziki Wheatley's coming back. There's a lot of experienced players that have been at Penn State since their day one, and they've had some struggles, and they're coming back for a clear purpose to run it all the way back. I think I see some more similarities in the makeup of the team with 2023 Michigan for Penn State than I see for 2024 Ohio State. I think that this team is going to be very reliant on the run game, a lot like Michigan was. Remember when they refused to throw the ball against Penn State during that national championship season? I could see Drew Aller being a lot like J.J. McCarthy, where maybe he doesn't put up the biggest and the baddest stats in the world, but we know the type of arm talent, we know the type of quarterback talent that he is. He might be only asked to really make plays when he needs to make plays down the field. I think that this is going to be a very physical, defensive-minded Penn State team. We'll see if that can carry them to the heights that it did for the 2023 Michigan Wolverines. Last thing that I want to end on is a story about 2 head coaches continuing down the path that they have paved throughout their careers. You know, some of these stories that are being told are new stories, but I think for these 2 specific coaches, I think 2024 and 2025 was a confirmation of what has been largely told throughout history when it comes to Bret Bielema and James Franklin. Let's start first talking about Bret Bielema. He was put on this earth to do one thing and one thing only: coach Big Ten football. He is as good of a developmental coach as there is. Like, you look at Bert, Illinois is not going to show up in the top 25 or the top 30 of a lot of these 247 rivals and on-3 recruiting rankings. But they find a way to take these players that fit their system, and they find a way to retain players and build and develop them through the years. And nobody's better at coaching them up than Bret Bielema is right now. So now I picked them to go 6-6 this season, but it should be no surprise to anybody that they just took care of business. They won the games that they were supposed to win, going 9-3, and then winning that bowl game against South Carolina to go 10-3. Maybe it's due to the shifting media landscape in college football, where now, because of the expanded playoff, we're so focused on the CFP, but this was like one of the quietest 10-3 seasons that I've witnessed in my lifetime, really. Now the thing for Illinois is expectations. You have people at On3, at ESPN, they're ranking Illinois in their way too early top 10s. They're ranking them in their way too early top 15s. And you might say, well, didn't they have a good year in 2022? They did have a good year in 2022, but they were losing Sidney Brown. They were losing Chase Brown. They were losing Tommy DeVito. They were losing Devin Witherspoon. Like, they were losing a lot of good players. There was an expectation that they were going to take a little bit of a dip down. Not this year. Not this year. They got a lot of guys coming back. Luke Altmaier, the experienced, really good quarterback, is going to be back. J.C. Davis is going to be back on the offensive line. Gabe Akis, a really good pass rusher, is going to be back there on the defensive line as well. If they can keep Caden Fagan healthy, right, he can be a 1,000-yard rusher in the Big Ten Conference. How is Illinois, because they're so used, probably under Brett Bielema, they're so used to being undervalued, right? His Twitter game steps up to maybe put a little bit more of a spotlight and a little bit more attention on Illinois football. Now the spotlight's going to be there. Now they're talking college football playoff in Champaign, Illinois. I'm very curious to see how they're going to adjust to that as things go on. But 2024, very much a confirmation that Brett Bielema is just one of the best head coaches in the Big Ten Conference. And then we got to talk about James Franklin. I think 2024 was also a confirmation, I think, but the story that has been largely told with James Franklin over the years and the path that has been paved and what we know about Penn State football. He wins all of the games that he should, and that's kind of how things went down this season. There were maybe opportunities for the Nittany Lions to trip up. Nope, he keeps his teams focused in those specific situations, and when they're more talented, they have a better football team, they win, certainly, a lot of the times, but coming up short in some of these big games. Against Ohio State, against Oregon, against Notre Dame. I'm not going to sit here and I'm not going to drag James Franklin through the mud because I just don't think that would be a very honest and a very good thing to do. Because it is very difficult to win 10 games and 10 games and 10 games year after year after year. It is very difficult to have the type of success that James Franklin has been able to have year after year after year. That being said, there is going to be a whole ton of pressure for James Franklin and the Penn State Nittany Lions to take it to another level next season. They host Oregon and they go to Ohio State. There's going to be a lot of big games from the old cats from Happy Valley next season. There is no question about that. Now, those are 5 stories that just stood out to me. Certainly, you might think that there are bigger stories than that. I don't want to say that these are the biggest stories, but they're ones that certainly came to my mind. I want to hear your thoughts on your big takeaways, stories that you took away that you felt the 2024 season told us this season. Leave all of that in the comments below. I'm Big Ten Ted. We will see you in the next one.
Thank you for watching and listening to Big Nation. Make sure to subscribe and follow Big Ten Ted on X, YouTube, and podcast platforms to stay in the know on all things Big Ten football.